Amen. Thank you, Bill. Appreciate that. Good to see everybody tonight, as always. And as we begin our lesson in James chapter 2, we'll start with about verse 12. We invite your thoughts and comments or your questions that you may have as we go through the discussion. So feel free anytime to jump in and participate as you will. I told Mike Marshall when he always texts me the day of the Bible class and asked what is the subject. And I told him if you had to have a title, I would say always saved by faith or works. And of course, you and I know the answer to that question is neither. Is both rather than neither. We're saved by faith and works, and we'll get into that as we continue. We get into verses 14 to 26. We won't cover all of that tonight. It'll probably be next week, maybe when we get through with those 13 verses. Hopefully we get through by next week. But we'll get into some of those tonight about the aspect of faith and works and so forth that James describes there, because there's a lot of, and Albert Barnes had a really good comment on a summation between what Paul said and what James says. And we know that there's no conflict in the Bible. There's no disagreement between Paul and James. A lot of people make a big issue out of it because, Paul talks about faith there in the book of Romans and other places. James is talking about works. But they both talk about both. And a lot of people kind of miss that point. Because of the way some of the phrasing is here in James chapter 2, indicates that James has a disagreement with Paul, and certainly he does not. And we'll get into that a little bit later on. So we're looking in verses 12 and 13, and get your thoughts on that as well. He was talking about the fact that if we offend in one thing, we are guilty of all, or we're guilty of violating the law. We talked about that at length last week, and just to bring you up to speed on what we were saying, that the person who commits a sin or commits, well, let's just say commits a felony, and he's been good most of the time in his life and so forth, but he commits a heinous act, he kills somebody, or he commits adultery, or whatever it might be, all of those other good things that he's done can't balance out or override the thing that he has committed. And that's basically what he's saying here. He's not saying he's guilty of every law. He's guilty of violating every precept or every command of God. He's just simply saying that he can't be justified by all the good things that he's done to balance out or counteract that one thing that he's done. So as a result of that, then he sums it up with this statement: "So speak ye, and so do," in verse 12 of James 2, "as they that shall be judged by the law of liberty. For he shall have judgment without mercy, that has showed no mercy, and mercy rejoiceth against judgment." Let me read just a little bit about what B.W. Johnson says, and then I want to get into a little bit more about some statements that Albert Barnes makes, which I think is really good, where he says, "So speak ye, and so act as one judged by the law of liberty." Of course, we know that the law of liberty is the gospel. "He shall have judgment without mercy that showed no mercy." So we must show mercy if we expect mercy. Our own spirit determines our manner of judgment, and he gives Matthew 6:15 as a reference. If we love our neighbor, God will love us. Now let me just read just a little bit about what Barnes said and invite your thoughts and comments on that. The fact about speaking, "So speak ye and so do as they that should be judged by the law of liberty." He says the meaning is that in all our conduct we are to act under the constant impression of the truth that we are soon to be brought into judgment, and that the law by which we are to be judged is that by which it is contemplated that we shall be set free from the dominion of sin. In other words, it's called the law of liberty. So we're going to be judged by that law of liberty. And so since we know that we're going to be judged by that law of liberty, he said, so speak and so do as you know that one day you're going to be judged by the things that you say and by the things that you do. So it's a... So the sense seems to be, in all of your conduct, whatever you say or do, remember that you're going to be held accountable for it. Of course, we know that the blood of Christ is going to cleanse us from all of those things, and he's not going to remember the things that we said or the things that we've done that we shouldn't if we get forgiveness of those things. If we haven't gotten forgiveness of those things, and that's really the import of that, then we're going to be judged by those things, and we can't plead that, well, I've done all these other things. You remember in Matthew 7, what did it say? Lord, hadn't we prophesied in your name, and hadn't we done many wonderful works, and we've done this, that, and the other? And he says, I never knew you. Depart from me, I never knew you. So what he's saying is that knowing that we're going to be judged and that we're going to be judged by the rule that God has set out. Of course, that's the gospel, of course, and we need to remember that since we know that that's going to happen, that it's one of the strongest inducements to lead a holy life. That's the thing that amazes me about the aspect of you can't fall from grace. Because if you, and I've talked, and I know you guys have too, talked to different ones about, their belief in once saved, always saved. Well, what is the inducement to live right if there's not going to be any punishment for you as a result of what you do? In other words, I'm a Christian. There's nothing I can do to lose my salvation. What is the impetus or the inducement for us to live right if we know there's nothing that I can do to lose my salvation? And I've asked people that before, and they don't have a very good answer when you ask them. Well, in other words, I could go out and commit adultery now, because I would tell some of these guys, here's what I did to become a Christian, and so I said, do you believe that I'm a Christian based on that? Yeah, you're a Christian based on that. Even though they may not believe the same way, they say, yeah, based on what the Bible says, you are. So in other words, I can go out and I can run out on my wife and I can do whatever I want to do, but I'm still okay with God, right? Yeah, but you're still going to be okay. So, but what he's saying here is that is not the case. In other words, we in verse 10, back to verse 10, whosoever should keep the whole law, yet if in one point, he's guilty of all. Now, who is he talking to here? He's talking to Christians. He's talking to Christians. So go back and look at the statement, 12 tribes which are scattered abroad, my brethren, count it all joy, and so forth and so on. So when he's talking to Christians here, he's saying that you've still got to live right and do right. You can't say, I've done a lot of wonderful things in my life, and I've done this one that I'm either unwilling to repent of or whatever, I'm going to continue to live like that. He's simply saying you need to speak and so do as though those are going to be judged by the law of liberty. One day you're going to give an account of that. Israel, you had a thought.
Yes, sir. I wasn't here last Sunday teaching teams, but is it your understanding as well that what you have seen people do is have a buffet style of religion?
Yeah.
Pick and choose.
Have it your way. Burger King or whatever, right?
Just pick and choose what they like. Or I mean, I don't really care about this particular sin. That's not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
Or, drinking is okay, but I'm going to do everything else.
Yeah.
And of course, as we understand, Christ did not teach that. And so the teaching is that we have to have the idea that we need to be growing to get better and to not have that attitude of, whatever's in our life is standing between us and God needs to go.
Right.
Or else there's an issue.
There's an issue. Right.
And so, but it just seems a lot of people I talk with, they just, out of ignorance, not trying to, belittle anybody, seem to have that attitude of buffet style of picking and choosing what they like.
Right. That's a good point, because it kind of sums up, and we emphasize this, the point that you're making is on verse 11, where he says, "But he that said, do not commit adultery, also said, do not kill. Now, if thou commit no adultery, yet if thou kill, you become a transgressor of the law." And this is what he's saying, that I can't say, okay, or let's just flip it over and say, well, I hadn't killed anybody, but I'm an adulterer and I'm going to live that way. And I can't expect God to justify me in the day of judgment, even though I've done a lot of wonderful things in my life. I hadn't killed anybody. I paid my debts, and I treat people right and do all these kind of things. I can't balance one against the other, basically is what he's saying. And we talked about that last week. We can't say, okay, I've walked off these 9 or 10 good things, but there's one thing lacking in my life. What did he tell the rich young ruler?
What lack I yet, and go and sell all that thou hast, and come and follow me.
One thing you lack, but he wasn't willing to do it.
Right.
And so I think that's what he's saying here, well, I hadn't killed anybody, or, okay, I've killed somebody, but I hadn't committed adultery. He's saying that the same law applies. In other words, the same person that said, "Thou shalt not commit adultery," also said, "Thou shalt not kill." Well, if you hadn't done one, you've done the other, you can't balance them out, basically is what he's saying. You're still a transgressor of the law. And that's what he's saying. And then verse 13, "For he shall have mercy without mercy that has showed no mercy, and mercy rejoiceth against judgment." So that's a principle, that's an equitable principle throughout the Scriptures. Let me just read 2 or 3 things. In Proverbs 21:13, "Whoso stoppeth his ears at the cry of the poor, he also shall cry himself, but will not be heard." So what he's saying here is, when you expect mercy, you got to give mercy, basically is what he's saying here. 2 Samuel 22, verses 26 and 27. "With the merciful thou wilt show thyself merciful, and with the froward thou wilt show thyself unsavory." And so the idea, which James seems to be saying here, is there will be a judgment, and that we must expect that it will be conducted on an equitable basis with equitable principles, that no mercy is to be shown when we don't show mercy. And that's basically what he's saying here, that our conduct, remember that our conduct, God is going to be impartial, and that we should live our lives accordingly. And then the aspect of mercy rejoices against judgment. I thought Barnes had a really good comment on this, and B.W. Johnson did too. And what Barnes says is that the Greek, the word rejoiceth, means glorieth. In other words, and mercy glorieth against or over judgment. And what he's saying is that the idea is that of glorying over, or when one is superior to another or has gained a victory over another. So he said the reference here is to the judgment, the trial of that great day, and the apostle, or James, stating the principles on which the trial of that day will be conducted, on which one class will be condemned and the other acquitted and saved. In reference to one class, the wicked, he says that where there has been no mercy shown to others, that none will be shown to that person. There will be judgment without mercy. In the other case, there will be, as it were, a triumph of mercy, or mercy will appear to have gained a victory over judgment. He says strict justice would indeed plead for their condemnation, but the attribute of mercy will triumph and they will be acquitted. And when we talk about mercy and justice, it seems to be, these terms seem to be in conflict. They're not when you look at it from a biblical standpoint, from the standpoint of salvation. And I want to look at that for just a second. So when we look at mercy and justice, you and I, when we stand before God in the day of judgment, what do we want?
Mercy.
We want mercy. We don't want justice, because we hear preachers say all the time, you can't earn it. You can't say, well, God, you owe it to me. So, so when we look at it, we want to be shown mercy in the day of judgment. And let me just read a couple of statements here. Talking about the attributes of mercy and justice, that they seem to be in conflict, but they're really not in conflict. He said this is a true statement of the plan of salvation and of what actually occurs in the redemption of the sinner. So when we think about that, when we've heard preachers say many, many times, and you and I have the same view, I think, and I've heard people pray the prayer, something like that, about asking for forgiveness and so forth and so on. So if you think about what Jesus did, and we have some of y'all pray that sometimes, he took our place on the cross when you look at it from that standpoint. So what do you and I, when the Bible talks about in Romans and other places, there's none righteous, no, not one. They've all gone astray, and so forth and so on. So what do you and I actually deserve on the day of judgment when you look at it that way? We deserve death because we're a sinner. All have sinned to come short of the glory of God. I mean, verse after verse after verse points that out. So justice demands punishment. But of course, God intervened in the case of mankind and sending the Son, and this wasn't an afterthought. This was in the foreknowledge of God. This was before the worlds were, before anything was created. He had the plan of salvation in mind. So that's what he's talking about. So justice demands that the sinner should be condemned. Mercy pleads that he may be saved. So you got these two things that seem to be in conflict with each other. So strict justice demands the punishment of the offender. You and I all offend. Well, what did James say in James chapter 3? If any man doesn't offend in is it in word or deed? In word, the same as a perfect man. Well, we know that none of us live up to that standard, and nobody has lived up to that standard except for one. So strict justice demands the punishment of the offender, and yet there are cases when mercy pleads, and when every man feels that somebody should be given, as it were, a second chance. Now, let me just read this other statement, because I thought he had a really good summation of the aspect of the plan of salvation as it relates to justice as opposed to mercy. And here's what Barnes says about that. In the plan of salvation, this does occur. He's talking about mercy triumphing over justice. Respect is done to justice, but mercy triumphs. If we look in Matthew, I should have gone back and looked at that. One of you Bible scholars tell me. When he's talking about all the things that we've done, verses 31 to 46, I can picture it, but, those on the right hand, you've 25, yeah, I couldn't get 25 out of my mind there. So you're talking about all these things that the person has done. He mentions like 6 things. You're taking care of the needy, and you visit the sick, and you've helped those in need, and so forth and so on. Welcome in, and then on the other, depart from me, and so forth and so on. Yes, that's what he's saying. So still God's plan still entails justice, because they got what they deserved, in the sense that they never came in contact with the blood of Christ, or if they did, they left it, and as a result of that, they don't have anybody to blame but themselves. But God's justice demands punishment in that case. But in the case of those on the right hand that did all these things that he talks about, those 6 things I think it is that he mentions there in Matthew 25, even though you still deserve death by the fact that you came in contact with the blood of his Son and did what he tells you to do, then he says, well done, enter in. So that's where mercy takes over. Not that we deserved it, but that's where mercy. So there you have you still have both there on the day of judgment. You still have justice on the left hand, but on the right hand you have mercy. And I think that's the way that we need to look at it. Let me just read this another statement. It says, justice is not disregarded, for the great Redeemer of mankind has done all that is needful to uphold it. In other words, who did he come to save? Everybody. He came to seek and save everybody. So he did his part, but there's the most free and full exercise of mercy, and while the justice of God is maintained, every benevolent feeling in the breast of all holy beings can be gratified in the salvation of countless thousands. So his justice is carried out on the day of judgment. There's going to be justice on the day of judgment, but there's going to be mercy on the day of judgment as well. So they're not in conflict with each other. And of course, we know that we have to live right and do right. And a lot of people say, well, there's nothing you can do. Well, we're going to find that in verses 14 to 28 as we get into that aspect of faith and works. Any thoughts on that before we get into verse 14? I will read verses 14 to 18 here in just a minute, and then we'll start commenting on some of that. Any thoughts? Anybody?
Well,
right.
you talking about rejoice. In Colossians 4:4, it says, rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice.
Did I use the word rejoice a while ago? Oh, okay, I got it. Good
I
point, sir.
thought you was talking about rejoice.
Rejoicing, there you go. Exactly. I appreciate that, Charlie. I was just kidding you. So in verses 14 to 18, he starts and this is where the aspect of faith and works come in. And of course, you got opposing views on it. Some people say you can work your way or you earn your salvation is by works, and then somebody else says no, it's by faith only. And of course, we know that that's not the case. Then there's somebody that would even go so far as to say neither one is by grace, or he picked some to be saved and some not to be saved, kind of thing. So you see all kinds of theories and all kinds of doctrines related to salvation. But if people would just read, particularly these 13 verses, and also what Paul said on numerous occasions, would find out that both are necessary for our salvation. And this is what James is explaining in these verses. So it begins by asking the question, and implied in the question is the answer. What doth it profit, my brethren, though a man say he hath faith and have not works, can faith save him? Well, and just implied in that question is the answer, no, faith can't save him. That's basically what he's saying. But he gives 2 or 3 examples, kind of on a personal level, and then he goes all the way back to the time of Abraham and Rahab and different things to illustrate the point that he's making. So the first point he makes is, if a brother or sister be naked and destitute of daily food, one of you say unto them, depart in peace, be you warmed and filled, notwithstanding you give them not those things which are needful to the body, what doth it profit? So what implied in that question is, nothing. It didn't profit them anything, right? Be you warmed and filled? Well, what good did it do if that's all that we said to them? And then he kind of sums it up, verse 17. Even so, faith. So he's compared the faith of a person with the need that somebody has for food or whatever the need might be. And we just say, well, I wish you well, wish you the very best, and hope it works out for you, and so forth. When we have the means to help them in that situation. So even so, faith, verse 17, if it hath not works, is dead, being alone. Yea, a man may say, thou hast faith, and I have works. So one says, well, I got faith. The other says, I have works. Show me thy faith without thy works, and I will show thee my faith by my works. So it has a very good summation, and of course, when he gives these other examples, when we jump down to verse 26, and we'll come back to this later on, but as far as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also. So we have many examples, and what he says here, he gets to the point there about you have to have faith. You have to have faith, but you have to have works as well. So James is not saying it's by works alone. It's a combination of the two, and he explains that as he goes along. That about Abraham and Rahab the harlot when they did that. Let's go back. Let's look at since we're going to mention Abraham here in a little bit. I hope I get to it. But in Hebrews 11, beginning down about verse 8. So Paul talks in Romans talks a lot about the faith of Abraham. And now James is using the same example of Abraham. So which one is right? Both of them. So Barnes is going to have a really good comment on this, and I'll just mention this kind of in passing, and we'll get to it later on because I want to read some of his comments later on, and maybe next week before I do that. But he's talking about, Paul is talking about the person before he becomes a Christian. In other words, he has to have this faith in order to become a Christian. James is talking to people that are already Christians. So there's a difference in the sense that you say, well, you can't do anything. Well, even before you become a Christian, you got to do something. But Paul is using the word faith, telling those that become a Christian, before you become a Christian, you have to hear God's word. So faith comes by hearing by the word of God, and so forth and so on, all things that he makes there. And then James is talking about, well, after become a Christian, can I just sit down and do nothing and expect God to save me at that point? What he's saying is, you can't do that, because when Paul talked about Abraham, he was talking about what God said about Abraham, and I believe it's Genesis 15:6, I think. But what James is talking about Abraham is 20 years later when he carried out what God told him to do and offering his son. So there was a difference in the time span there. Paul is talking about he believed God. He believed God, and he was called a friend of God because he believed in God. How did he demonstrate that, though, later on? Well, when he told him to get up and move out of his home country, what did he do? He did it. When he was told to offer his son, what did he do? And you go ahead, Israel, and then I want to read this just a minute.
And Coach, you may already have this in your notes, but as I understand that people who believe this way, that is, who believe that you can't earn your salvation, which everyone in this room agrees.
Agrees, yeah.
But they think you can do nothing to earn your salvation. And
Right.
anything that you do, you're trying to earn your salvation. But John 6:29, Jesus says, this is the work of God, that you would
But
believe.
that's a work.
That's work.
That's work.
That
There you go.
Believe on him that sent.
There you go.
Even belief is a work.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's a statement that I made, and let me just throw it out. I was going to do it a little bit later, but since Israel mentioned that, I want to read a statement that I was just thinking about as I was going back over it tonight a little bit before it came, and see if you would agree with or disagree. Our works don't save us, but we can't be saved without good works. Faith. Faith plus works equals salvation or justification. So let me read again. Our works don't save us, but we can't be saved without good works. Now, when we talk about works, we talk about doing God's works. We're talking about doing, and when we talk about works, we're talking about commands. We're talking about commands of God, and so forth. So, even that doesn't save us. It's a combination. By grace are you saved through faith, that not of yourselves, so forth and so on. We know all the verses. We are, and then Ephesians 2:8 through 10, and he talks about the works to follow and so forth. But let me just read what the Hebrew writer says about Abraham, because both of these use Abraham as an example. By faith Abraham, so he had faith, and you go back to Genesis, I think it's 15:6. You can verify that. When he was called to go out into a place which he should receive for an inheritance, obeyed. Well, how did he demonstrate his faith? He obeyed. He obeyed. He went out not knowing whither he went. By faith, he sojourned in the land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs of him, so forth, of the same promise. For he looked for a city which has foundations. Through faith also Sarah, and then go down, jump down to, I think it's verse 17. By faith, Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac. So by faith, he demonstrated his faith by being willing to offer his son. God told him to go out and kill him, and he was willing to do that, and that demonstrated his faith. By faith, when he was tried, offered up Isaac, and he that received the promise offered up his own begotten son, and so forth, accounting that God was able to raise him up. He had enough faith that if he killed him, God was going to raise him up anyway. As a matter of fact, he told his servants, even when he sent him out, I'm going to go and do what God told me to do, and then we're going to come again. He used the word we. He was talking about him and Isaac. So we're going to come again. In other words, he had enough faith, and the Hebrew writer says that. He had enough faith that God, he said, accounting that God was able to raise him up, even from the dead, and so forth and so on. So that's how strong his faith was. So it wasn't a dead faith, it was an active faith, an obedient faith. And that's the point that he's making here. So let me jump down to here's what Barr said. He said, it should be observed that the standpoint from which James views this subject is not before a man is converted, inquiring in what way he may be justified before God, or on what ground his sins may be forgiven, but is after a man is converted, showing that faith can have no value which is not followed by good works. In other words, if you just have because he makes mention of the devils in verse 19, they also believe and trembled, and we can't say they were saved or they were justified in any way at all. So that's not real faith, and the good works are necessary if a man would have evidence that he is justified. Thus understood, all that James says is in entire accordance with what is taught elsewhere in the New Testament. So what he says about it, as we said, is not in conflict at all with the Apostle Paul, and we'll look at that a little bit more later. So it's implied in this question, where he says, can faith save him? It's implied that faith cannot save him, and that's what he's saying in answer to the question, because of the way the question is phrased. We know that the answer to that question, can faith save, and the answer is no. The meaning here is that faith which does not produce good works has no value whatsoever. And then he gets into the aspect of the brother or sister as his first example that is in need, and we say, be you warmed and filled. We have the means to take care of that person or to help that person. But we say, well, wish you well, and I hope everything goes well for you. So what he's saying is that doesn't do any good whatsoever for that person. So he's using that as an example to demonstrate the idea of faith and not doing what we're commanded to do. What good does our faith do if we're not willing to do what God tells us to do in that regard? And of course, in the plan of salvation, that's as far as some people go with it. They say, well, yeah, I believe in God, but they don't demonstrate that by doing what God says for them to do. So does it profit any? What he's saying is no, it doesn't do any good at all. If we acknowledge God, the devils do that, he says, that we say, yeah, do you believe in God? Yeah, I believe in God. I believe I'm morally bound. Well, we're not willing to do anything to demonstrate what our faith is all about. Kind of like we talked about a while ago about the rich young ruler. he went away sad or sorrowful. It didn't do him any good. He comes in contact with the master. The master tells him what to do, but he's not willing to do it. So, as a matter of fact, he acknowledged it to some degree. All these commands have I kept from my youth up. I've done all of these things. Well, you lack one thing, and he wasn't willing to do it. And as a result of that, we know what the outcome was or would be in that situation. Charlie, go ahead.
All right, in Ephesians 3:17, it says that Christ may dwell in your hearts by faith, that ye being rooted and grounded in love.
Yep, it's a deep faith. You've got to be, he's talked about rooted and grounded in it. Absolutely. Good point.
Coach?
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sorry. You sure know this passage, but 1 John 3:17 is a good sister passage to this. I can read that.
Yeah, go ahead, read it.
But whoso hath this world's good and seeth his brother hath need and shutteth up his bowels of compassion toward him, how dwelleth the love of God in him? My little children, let us not love in word,
and deed.
in tongue, but in deed.
Indeed, and
truth.
Yep, absolutely, excellent, excellent verse. That's beautiful when you look at what he says here in James 2. Hit it right on the head, Israel. That's a good point. Excellent verse. And so that's what he's saying. That's what he's saying in relation to later on being justified. But he's using an example that all of us can understand to drive home the point. So Barnes makes this statement: "It is not enough for salvation without the benevolent and holy acts to which it would prompt, any more than the good wishes and kind words of the benevolent are enough to satisfy the wants of the hungry and to clothe the naked. Faith is not and cannot be shown to be genuine unless it is accompanied by corresponding acts." So that's the evidence. That's the evidence of our faith. It can't be a dead faith. So when he talks about faith, it can be a dead faith, or it could be an inactive faith, but it could be an obedient faith, and that's what the faith that God wants is designed to lead to good works. He created us in Christ Jesus unto good works, Ephesians 2, down about verse 10, I believe it is. So this faith is intended to produce a holy life, and then when we carry out God's will by obedience to Him, and then, of course, that's where we demonstrate our faith. Let's see. Let me find another. I don't want to read all this, but some things are, I think, kind of catchy, and I want to make sure I don't leave anything out. Let's look at the words being alone there that he mentions there in verse 17. In other words, by itself is what the word in the Greek would indicate. Being by itself, that is, it's destitute of any accompanying fruits or actions on that part. It shows that it is dead, and that's the point that he's making there in verse 17. All right, any thoughts before we get into verse 18?
How do you decide when you're in the Walmart parking lot, somebody walks up to you and tells you they lost their wallet, they're out of gas, would you give me $20 so I can get them on home? I've run into that more than once, and I think it's somewhat of a scam. That's one of the problems when you want to do what's right to support others, and when they're in a problem.
That's a good point, Bill.
Coat, they need something to wear, but what do you do when somebody asks you a question like that? You give them $20, you give them $5, and they say they're hungry, they don't have any food.
Yeah.
You know, I've offered to take people to McDonald's and buy them lunch, and they generally just want the money.
Yeah, what's right. Yeah.
So it's really a tough choice.
It's a tough choice.
It's also the same thing on charities that you choose to support.
Exactly.
So many of those, they take 90% of the money, or 85% of the money for their own internal functions and support, and a little bit goes to the group that they're supposedly collecting money for. And those also are hard to choose, and you
It is.
want to do the right thing, but it's the hard choices to make.
Yeah, hard choices a lot of time. Yep.
And, you know, fortunately, we have a pantry here for food items, that's part of our contributions, and the foods that we bring also help support people in need. And I don't think we give out much money here, do we?
No, most of the time is, we'll take them over there and let them.
Get them good food.
Well, I've been burned several times, you know, giving people money. I mean, even here at the church building, Lane said, well, you did right, you know, that person did something else with it, and you did right by doing it, and that sort of thing. So that sours my conscience a little bit. But a lot of times, like you said, Bill, sometimes you got to make judgment calls on certain things. And I used to, you know, we talk about seeing somebody in need. I'm out hitchhiking all the time, and I said, why in the world do they not stop? I know there's a whole bunch of Christians that are coming by and they're not picking me up. They see that I have a need, and they won't give me a ride to the next town or whatever, you know. So, but we have situations like that all the time where you just have to do the best you can. Like a lot of times, you come up to four-way stop somewhere, in Mobile particularly, and you'll see somebody with a sign out, you know, need food or whatever. What do you do? Well, there are times that I've given them a buck or two, and then times that I haven't, you know, so.
You know, also the times of this writing, they didn't have a welfare system. They didn't
Exactly.
have government assistance.
Right.
All that. Not saying that don't have responsibility, but
Right.
that's a great question, by the way.
Yeah, it is a great question. And it's a judgment thing. I mean, even here at the building, we've had people come in and, you know, you offer them certain things. Most times, like I said, they don't want that. They want money and or if you offer to go gas the car up, you know, a lot of times they don't want that. They just want the money. And I saw one night I gave him $20 or whatever outside the building there, and I said, well, there's a service station, you know, right over there. That person went north, and no telling where they wound up, you know. I should have checked to see whether they were near empty or whether they had enough gas in their tank, but I didn't do that. So anyway, go ahead, Charlie. Thank you guys, appreciate it.